Jaron Boots, Ennis, his upcoming fight now for a belt. First fight at 154 pounds. It's going to be for the WBA interim belt. I'll give you my thoughts in this video. Now, let's get right to it.
Foray into the 154 L. The stakes are raised for Jaron Boots Ennis's foray into the 154 LBS division, even if the matchup itself leaves a lot to be desired. An interim version of the WBA junior middleweight title will be on the line for Ennis's clash with Angola's Lima this Saturday from Xfinity Mobile Arena in Ennis's hometown of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The scheduled 12-round contest was previously designated as a final eliminator for the main version of the WBA title held by Germany's Abbas Barao. However, the matchup received an upgrade, which should help speed up the process for Ennis to eventually challenge for his second divisional title. Should Boots?
So, this is now for a title. I mean, my thing is this. In boxing, this is the problem. It becomes harder and harder to identify really a real champion. And I really hate to have to do this, but they made me. In boxing, I don't really like saying running and email champion, paper champion. You know, that's just not something I enjoy doing. But the way they got boxing set up right now, they're leaving me but no choice because they keep adding new belts and making decisions like this. Where Jaron, listen, he's a great fighter. I've been a fan of his. No fights at 154 pounds. The biggest fight for him, you know, outside of like a Crawford, which it doesn't look like that's going to happen, he wasn't on board to move up at that time, and that was Virgil Ortiz. Now he's being rewarded with a fight that nobody really asked for. It just, Eddie Hearn, this is one thing that Eddie Hearn does, and a lot of the promoters, but Eddie Hearn does it particularly well, where they'll put like a Boots in with the guy who happens to be ranked, and that becomes the selling point. It's like, hey, you guys got to respect this matchup because he's fighting an opponent that has been ranked. Yeah. You know what I mean? So that's how they try to validate certain matchups and explain why these matchups are happening because the guy happens to be ranked. But if you've been watching boxing as long as I have, you already know the drill. And you know how it goes, where we know who's kind of a consensus best. We know who we want to see fight the other person. So at the end of the day, we're not going to be fooled or led astray with fights that nobody asked for. And then you just frame it as, yo, but it's a champion. I mean, there's a lot of politics and a lot of different ways in 2025 for guys to get ranked, right? You see these little greasing of the palms and promoter tricks where, yo, look after me and I'll look after you. So it's kind of weird that the Boots fight, he's fighting for a title now, even though it's an interim title. And I strongly believe that what these companies do is they might know if Boots gets past Lima, kind of what his next fight is. So now it becomes a selling point that Boots is a champion at 154 pounds. So if he ends up fighting, let's say, Virgil Ortiz, now it looks like he's this strong champion at 154 pounds. Literally the oldest trick in the book, right? And this is why boxing, in my opinion, is looking rather watered down. Because, especially, not me, because I watch boxing, cover boxing, but there's a lot of people, and ultimately they're confused who the real champions are, who should be a champion, who's championship quality, and who kind of had good push and good promotion to put them in certain predicaments or positions. Again, I think Boots is a talented fighter, the way Eddie Hearn has moved him, very questionable. Outside of the unification with Stanionis, since he teamed up with Eddie Hearn, his career's kind of been a blur, right? Where, I mean, you have one unification against, again, Stanionis is solid, but I mean, he's not like an Errol Spence. He's not like a Terrence Crawford. And I get it. Boots said he wanted those fights. But all in all, I'm not really impressed with just making everything a title fight for the sake of doing it and then acting like this is a long-standing champion. Especially, like, for example, I believe Virgil Ortiz has a version of the WBC belt, right? So now it's going to look like it's a strong unification when Virgil Ortiz nor Boots are full-fledged champions in the division, which I think becomes confusing to the casual fan. And it almost is like fake it till you make it, right? Instead of putting these fighters in like real fights that fans want to see, where they gotta beat Murtazaev. He's a credible champion that you would get credit for beating, right? And then if you did that, then you would garner the attention needed, and then now you're a certified real champion. But in boxing, that's not what's happening. We're having guys who are, you know, kind of put in positions like Lima. Should the Lima fight really be a title fight? A guy that nobody's really ever heard of, a guy whose resume is pretty thin, and Boots' resume is pretty thin, and then they're fighting for a title. Now, again, Boots didn't do this, but I strongly believe this is a lot of politics behind the scenes, and I'm just not a big fan of it. Not a big fan at all, because it becomes hard to distinguish the who's who in boxing when anybody can become a champion with the right steps, right? Like Boots, we still haven't seen him fight. And it's funny, it's really funny to me where you'll have guys, even like Eddie Hearn, right? Where Eddie Hearn will talk about other fighters that aren't even assigned to him, like Gervonta Davis. They'll be like, oh, who is Davis fought? Why is he fighting Jake Paul? Make all these questions and concerns about Tank. But then you got a 28-year-old Boots, and then it's like, who is he fighting? You know what I mean? So it's funny how people pick and choose when it's applicable and when it's not, right? So you want to scrutinize Tank's resume, but you look at Tank, he's fighting pit bulls and Rollies, and then Pacquiao's trying to fight Rolly. And then Lamont Roach is fighting Pitbull Cruz. And then Ryan Garcia, another Tank leftover, is saying he wants to fight Barrios, another guy Tank knocked out. You know what I mean? So we got to start keeping it real and keeping it fair when it comes to the boxing dialogue. If we're going to scrutinize this guy's resume, let's look at everybody's resume intently. You know what I mean? And look at situations like Boots and Lima. Is this really a title fight? Let me know in the comment section. Subscribe for more boxing news, and I'm out.